Hey, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Biz Books, where I speak to great authors about great books that they have written. My name is Gene Marks, and I'm speaking with Abby Donnelly today. Back in 2017, Abby published her book, Straight Talk About Planning Your Succession, a primer for CEOs. And for those of you guys that are following us on Biz Books, I'm having a few conversations about succession planning because the fact of the matter is, more than half of U.S. small business owners are over the age of 50, according to the Small Business Administration, and it's a big impact on and a big thing on many of our minds. And Abby's got a lot of great insights as to why you would want to sell your business. This is a book not necessarily on the nuts and bolts of selling your business, but what's driving business owners to sell their businesses. So first of all, Abby, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you. Well, I'm thrilled to be here as well, Gene. I think you're doing your viewers a great service of providing them some insight into books that they can read and enjoy that fit their needs.
Yeah, this series has been so much fun for me, and I'm going to do it forever. It is just I'm reading, Abby, just like business books that I've always admired. And you know what it is? Selfishly, it pushes me into reading books on topics like succession planning that I should be reading anyway, and I always kind of blow it off. But now, because like you and I said, like, okay, we're going to talk about this. I buy your book, I read it, and I learn and I get smarter. Tell me a little bit about yourself, Abby. Like, give us your background and how you came to write this book.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for asking. So, my background, actually, by degree, I've got a bachelor's degree in math and a master's degree in statistics. And I started my career with Procter & Gamble in manufacturing, in product supply, and doing internal consulting work. And when I left there, I started my own consulting firm, and I had a stint by myself. And then I partnered up with Sandler Training, and I did this kind of work actually within Sandler Training and also training sales professionals. And then I broke back out again in 2012, end of 2012, early 2013, to start what is the Leadership and Legacy Group today. And that, what we really focus in on is working with business owners, primarily small and medium-sized companies, to help them develop their leaders for succession, in the CEO and the executive level. And then we also work with the owners to help them figure out what they're going to do in their next chapter. So today that means a lot because many of them will live a long time healthy in retirement.
Sure. Yeah. Obviously, as the human lifespan has been increasing, I mean, we have had a bunch of baby boomers retire, and we'll get into this because a lot of times, as you mentioned in your book, there are people that just don't think about what's after, selling your business. And that's a big part of the decision to sell your business. Abby, let's get into it a little bit. I pulled out a bunch of things from your book that I thought would be of interest to talk about. First of all, you reference another book, another author, Patrick Ungashik. I guess I'm pronouncing it. Okay. And you mentioned this because you pointed out in your book, he writes about something called the rolling 10. And I wonder if you can comment on what is the rolling 10 and why should we know what that phrase means?
Yeah, so when I first heard Patrick Ungashik speak, I was mesmerized because he had such a deep understanding of the market and succession planning for owners. And the phrase that he coined, the rolling 10, where, and I've actually proven this out myself. So you talk to a business owner and you say, so when are you planning on exiting your business? And they typically say, 5 to 10 years.
Right.
And you see them again in 3 or 4 years. And you say, so when are you planning to exit your business? And they say, 5 to 10 years. Them again, 3 to 5 years later, and you say, so when are you planning on exiting your business? And they say 5 to 10 years. And so the idea is that the concept is always top of mind, but the execution is usually 5 to 10 years out.
Why is that a bad thing?
Well, I think it's not always a bad thing for a younger owner. When I asked this question, because I traveled around and spoke to a lot of Vistage groups and, other CEO peer groups, and I would ask the same question. And what I found is that there would be CEOs that are in their 40s that would say 5 to 10 years, and there would be CEOs in their 70s that would say 5 to 10 years. And so I think, whether this is good or bad is really dependent on what your contingency plans are for your business, because you have a responsibility to your employees and your customers. But I also think it depends on, what your own contingency plans and goals are.
Right.
So everything is 5 to 10 years out, you're never going to get there. And what I have seen in some situations is that when owners get into their late 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they're still, without an obvious succession plan, their employees start getting really nervous.
Yeah.
And wondering like what's going to happen in the business. And sometimes your best employees are the ones that are going to go find jobs somewhere else. And that's not a good situation for anyone except your best employees.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I was thinking about the exact same thing. It sends such a wrong message out to your employees. If you do say like, listen, I'm going to have a succession plan, I'm planning on getting out of here in 10 years, your employees and maybe your family members that might be in the business are making their plans around it. And if you're pushing it out and pushing it out and pushing it out, that has an impact on a morale impact, right? On everybody in your company.
Well, and it's confusing, even if you've got a designated successor, if their roles aren't really clearly defined of what that next role will be for the owner, then there's confusion for everyone around, well, who's doing what and who should I be going to? And when is this, this successor going to take over? Right. So it can be really tough.
You name some, you give some stats early on in the book about business owners wanting to leave. You say that, 42% of them say that maximizing their business value is the #1 goal. And yet only 11% of the owners in one study that you cite have even valued their business. So can you talk to me a little bit about why that's such an issue?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I think when business owners hear the word value my business, they may have been exposed to valuations that are very expensive.
Right.
And of spending $50,000 just to get a number, theoretically about what my business is worth. Well, that's not a real good use of their resources, especially if they're going to be transitioning the business to a family member or a key employee. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes the valuation in that context isn't that critical. But there are many, many ways to get a valuation number that would be absolutely useful for an internal sale, a relationship sale where, you're transitioning it to someone in the company. But I think it's a step in the direction for many owners that make succession real. And if it makes it feel real and they're not ready yet, then what are they going to do with that information? Now they have to face the fact that, oh my gosh, succession might be coming sooner than I'm emotionally prepared for.
Right. You write about as well how there's one thing to come up with a strategy for building value in your business, but one of the biggest issues that a lot of your clients face is that they don't pay attention to that strategy. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I believe that you're building your strategy, you have to build it, through one or two lenses. You either have to have a strategy that is going to be effective for you to showcase it and market to an outside buyer, or you got to have a successor who's able to run and execute against that strategy. And if you're planning an internal sale and you have a successor that's not capable or not interested in executing against that strategy, you either need a new strategy or you need a new successor. And so, the idea of figuring out what that strategy is going to be in alignment with the plan that you have for either an external sale to a third party or an internal sale is critically important.
Okay. So, we know that we're not valuing our businesses like we should be doing. We know that even if we come up with a strategy, a lot of business owners have a hard time following that strategy as well. There are some other ugly truths that you mentioned in your book, right? There are 3 of them. I can prompt you unless you know them off the top of your head. But I'd love you to talk a little bit about the ugly truths, and just to help a little bit. No qualifier buyer, right? Your identity is deep in the business, and there's discomfort in the stress and uncertainty. So I'd love to go, and then there's the real ugly truth. So let's first of all talk about, I'd love to go through each of these, because they're all really important. So there's no qualified buyer or accessor, no sale. What do you, why is that such an ugly truth?
Well, I think most of us that own a business believe that our business is going to be very attractive to, we tend to overvalue what our business, what the business is worth. And we tend to talk about our business in terms of what we think we can get for it, which is often much more so than the buyer's willing to pay. And so if you can't find somebody that's qualified to buy the business from you, you don't have a sale. I mean, it's just that simple. When I was at Sandler, we used to say, no, no pain, no sale, no buyer, no sale. It's kind of a similar concept. And so the successor or the buyer needs to be qualified. And there are a number of criteria that are super important. One is that they need to be able to run the company and at least maintain it. But ideally, you don't want to sell it to somebody that can just maintain it. You want them to be able to grow it. Most owners want their buyer to be able to maintain some of the cultural dynamics that they're so proud of that have been inherent in their growth of the business. And then, one of the big ones is, can they afford it? So many people that own businesses today are depending deeply on at least a portion of the proceeds of the sale of their business to fund their retirement at the level that they have lived their life so far. And so if there isn't enough funding there, then they're not going to be a qualified successor. You can't afford to sell it to them. So those are some of the main things that show up. But I also think a qualified successor, there's some of that emotional stuff as well, as like, could I, as the owner, see myself turning my company over to this person? Do they share the same core values that I have? They may be able to maintain my culture, but are they going to share the same core values? And will I be able to sleep every night knowing that this person now owns what I have worked 30, 40 years to build?
Yeah, Abby, but then, again, and I like your comment on this as well. I mean, some people, would say, who cares? I get my check, I cash out, I move to Arizona or Florida, and I'm good. Like, why should I care if I'm selling my business if the person buying it knows how to run it, will be able to grow it, will be able to sustain it? Tell me why you think that's important.
Yeah, so what's interesting is I've interviewed for this book that we're talking about. I interviewed 50 different CEOs, and I've interviewed even more than that for a next book that I'm working on. But what's so interesting is that the thing that is most comfortable for people to talk about is the idea of cashing out. Every business owner wants to be comfortable in conversations about selling their business and feel like they've earned a big payday. But really, that is not the driver for the vast majority of business owners that have small and medium-sized businesses. The vast majority of them deeply, deeply want to take care of their employees. They want to maintain the culture. They want to leave a legacy because the business means something to them. And so, if they're selling to somebody, whether it's a third party or a person that is not going to be able to do that, it creates a lot of emotional turmoil and heartburn for them. And so, but it's super hard to talk about that. You don't sit around at a cocktail party and say, well, it's really devastating to me to think about leaving this business to someone that's not going to care for my employees the way that I have cared for them. It's a whole lot more fun to talk about, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe the offer that I got from, a third party buyer to invest, to buy my business, or to even invest to get 51% of my company.
Sure. It's funny, there are people in this world, there are professions in this world that are people that are professional buyers and sellers of businesses, people that are brokers, they're in the M&A world, equity firms, private equity firms. They're used to buying up a business and then chopping it up and turning around and selling it off, maybe in whole or in pieces. To them, that's their business. But if you're an existing business owner, that's not your profession. You spent your whole life making air filters or parts for the auto industry or what, you know what I mean? You're not a professional buyer and seller of businesses. So when it comes time to sell your business, there is a lot more involved in that. It's, you put your heart and soul and blood and sweat and tears into this thing for maybe your whole life, maybe other generations before you. And I guess we can't discount that, which gets me to your real ugly truth. You say there's no qualified buyer is an ugly truth, potentially. Your identity is deep in the business. That's a truth. There is discomfort, there's stress and uncertainty in selling your business. That's a truth. But the real ugly truth, what is that, Abby?
Yeah, so the real ugly truth is that this process is incredibly emotional.
Right.
Emotional from so many different angles. And, the majority of owners, and this is, generationally, this is changing, but the majority of owners that are in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s today are men. And our culture just has not given a lot of support for men to be in a position to talk about their emotions and to, really process through them in in an outward way. And so, they can be angry about things and they can be, frustrated with things, but all the other emotions that come with this are just not something that is comfortable to talk about. And yet they can derail the process faster than anything. And those emotions show up whether you're selling to someone, that third party buyer, any of those folks that you so eloquently described, they can show up there, or they can show up whether you're selling, even if you're selling to someone inside the company that you've known really well, maybe even their whole life, like your children, your adult children, or key employees that you hired and have been with you, loyal, effective, talented employees that have been with you for 20, 30 years. It's just an emotional process because this is like, another baby.
It really is. So I do a lot of speaking, right? And I speak to a lot of industry associations. And I joke about like you're selling air filters or auto parts or tires, but these are like the industry associations I speak to. And I got to tell you, I mean, like when I speak to these groups, the audiences are predominantly white middle-aged men. That's just the way it is. It's changing the demographics and will change more over time. But right now, that is the demographic. And these men, I look out in the audience and they're all, so many of them are in their 50s and 60s or whatever. I mean, I can only imagine the emotions they go through. And you're right. People don't talk about that because no one seems to have any empathy for that demographic right now,
Well, and it's not just the demographic. I don't think they have empathy for an owner that's selling their business. It's like, what have you got? In fact, people quote this to me. I've got a quote in the next book. It's like, what have you got to complain about?
Right.
You built a great company. You found a buyer that has the resources to pay you what you felt like it was worth, or maybe even more. And now you're going to complain because, it's emotional. Give me a break.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And it is, I mean, you mentioned in here that there's a PwC survey, 75% of business owners said that they profoundly regretted the decision to sell their business. And you know who I bet you regrets it even more are their spouses.
That's right. That's hilarious. You're exactly right.
I mean, it really is. It's just, you spend your whole life doing something and working 14 hours a day at your business and your heart and soul, and then it's gone. And these are not people, at least most of them aren't just going to like go and, oh, great, I'll just nap all day or play golf. They they got to keep something to do, and they got to drive their spouses next. Okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to comment on that there's one of the people that I interviewed for the next book, because it's very top of mind. He said, the first couple of weeks that I was gone after, and this was not a business sale, but it was a transition. And the first couple of weeks, he said, it was crazy because I was my spouse around the house trying to, tell her when to eat lunch and tell her what to do. And she didn't know what to do with me. It was driving her crazy, and I had to find something else. And that's why the next chapter stuff is so important to me.
It is, and I guess that gets back to some of the advice that you give in your book, which I'd like you to expand a little bit. Is that you can't just be thinking about the sale of your business. As part of this whole transaction is, what are you going to do after the sale occurs, right?
That's
And
right.
some people, they've got a plan. They're like, yeah, I'm going to sell the business and I'm going to volunteer at this agency, or maybe I'm going to start a new business, or maybe I'm going to, take up the guitar. But it's really important to think beyond the sale of your business, right?
It is. And, what's interesting to me is that when people talk about what they're going to do, they often do, I'll ask an audience, what do you think? And I've asked thousands of people this question because I do a lot of speaking engagements like you do as
Mhm.
and I'll get in front of the audience and I'll say, so what do you think the top 3 things are that people tell me or tell each other that they're going to do in requirement? And they get them every single time. There might be some brief nuances, but they say, 1, I'm going to travel a lot more.
Right.
2, I'm going to spend more time with family. And 3, I'm going to play a lot more golf.
Right.
They say tennis, but usually it's golf. And then occasionally I'll have somebody throw out volunteer more. And the challenge with all that, even the volunteer work, is that without being very intentional, not just about the organization that you might want to volunteer for, but what specific work you want to do based on your favorite strengths to use, based on what you're passionate about, and based on the lifestyle priorities that matter most to you, you may choose an organization that you really love, but end up doing work that just is a drag for you. And now you're into some volunteer work. And if you don't do it, it's like, well, now what are you going to do? So
you're right. You're right. It's funny. I have a friend of mine who did sell his business, and he said the exact, I want to travel a lot more. That's what he said. See the world. It's very overrated, Abby.
well, I mean, how much can you travel, right?
Agreed.
I mean, you kind of want to come home.
Agreed. And these are people, by the way, that are used to giving orders, that are used to other people following their orders. They're used to running a business. Then suddenly they're traveling on a group tour with a bunch of 70-year-olds and like following around. Now we're going to go see this historical monument, then go see this, and then we're going to go to this restaurant. The guy that I talked to, he said I was going nuts after 5 days, doing this, because I wanted something to do, something I could make an impact, something I could, it just was very much out of their element. And again, we can't generalize. I mean, there are some people that will take to it great, but
of course, sure.
I guess the point is that, and and you make in your book, is that you got to think beyond it, and you got to really look in the mirror and really say, like, man, when this transaction is done, what am I going to do? Say it's the Monday after the transaction. What am I going to do all day? You got to be prepared for that, because it sounds great, but it's and the typical business owner takes so little vacation as it is, that it's just going to be a big change. Okay. You also write about independence in the book, about how critical you are in your business. One of the reasons, so Abby, so like my company, I have 10 people in my company, and I've been running it for about 25 years, and my company is worth nothing. Like, we have no assets. We're a service firm. We have no assets. We have no long-term agreements. We have no, it's a, I built up cash over the years and put that away in savings. That's the model that I followed. But the main reason why I can't sell my business ever, besides having no real assets to speak for, contracts, guaranteed income, is that if I go outside and get hit by a bus tomorrow, Abby, my business ends. Do you know what I mean? And you make the point of asking yourself, can you take off a month or two? And what impact would that have on the business? So tell me a little bit about why you should be asking yourself that question.
Yeah, so there are a couple of drivers of value, and there are different companies out there. I'm familiar with several of them that help owners understand what levers they can pull on to increase the value of their company. And owner independence is one of those important levers, because someone's going to buy your business. They want to buy a business that can live on without you. Otherwise, they got to keep you around. And many businesses that sell, they come with an earnout. And so the owner expects that they're going to have to be around. But if your business requires you to be around that much, your earnout is going to have to include you transitioning that. And there are no other options, or you really harm the value of the business, or there is no value in the business, like you talked about with your business.
Yeah.
So I think it's, even if the business is going to be run by, a family member or key employee, setting them up for success so that you can actually go and, into that next chapter, which I hate the word retirement because I think it's outdated. Retirement is outdated, but that next chapter, I think you've earned the right to be able to go enjoy that time.
Right. I think you're absolutely right. And that chapter and your advice there reminded me a lot of the E-Myth. Did you ever read that book?
Yes, I love that book.
Me too. I mean, it's just one of those defining books on small businesses. It's probably 30, 40 years old now, but his whole, I remember one of the major examples he gave was like a McDonald's franchise and how, there, everything is documented. There's policies, there's procedures. I mean, there's like a book on how to cook a cheeseburger, the way to do it. And that way, like if a manager leaves, the entity keeps going on. They can just insert another manager into the process, and it's why there are business owners that own multiple, dozens, hundreds of McDonald's franchise, because they each operate on their own independently, because they have a set of rules. That's value to me. You don't need the owner there.
It's huge. That's exactly right. I mean, what you're talking about is all those internal systems that keep the company running. And it doesn't really matter. I mean, yes, you need skills to be able to do that, but it's much easier to transition any role in the company if the infrastructure is in place to support the ongoing systems that make it successful.
100%. And that's what a buyer wants, right? I mean, they really do not want the owner hanging around too much longer. They would really prefer to take it over. That's why they're buying it. Neither does the owner. Now, you say, as we talked about earlier about having a plan, you talked about that rolling 5 to 10 years, 5 to 10. Let's assume that's not rolling. Let's assume that you actually have a legit 5 or 10 year plan to sell your business. One of the key things when you sell a business, you point out is your people, having the right leaders in your business, because somebody's going to buy your business. There's hard assets are important, but, and I know it sounds corny, but it's really, really true. Your people are your biggest asset. And that's what a prospective buyer is going to look at. So you recommend beginning a development process for your employees to, and you talk about CARES, which is competencies, attitude, results, experience, and skills. Tell me a little bit about developing your managers so that they are at their best for when it comes time to build that value and sell your business.
Yeah, so I like to talk about it as intentional development, because I think there's a lot of development out there. People talk about coaching, they talk about training, and those are certainly some good development methodologies, but the vast majority of good intentional development happens when you provide targeted learning experiences and broadening opportunities. And so, to do that intentionally, you have to understand what are the competencies that I need to instill in the leadership team that I'm developing in these key roles. What are the results that are most important for our organization to get and for this individual to get in the role that they're in? Attitude matters. If you have the right attitude, you can accomplish a whole lot more. And so I included that in there. Sometimes that's, the least trainable or developable, you've got to work a little bit harder on that, but it is moldable, I should say. And then what experience, as I mentioned, do they need to have and skills to develop? So for me, the best example, and I include this story in the book, but the best example of it is that I had a situation with the CEO of a bank, and he went regularly down to the Capitol and lobbied the legislators. And so when we were talking about succession planning for him, he had 2 candidates that were on his leadership team that he thought either one of them might be the right fit to replace him at some point. And so we talked about, well, how are you developing them? And he said, well, I'm going to bring them. One of the examples was I'm going to bring them to Raleigh with me, and they'll sit in and they'll watch what I do. And this whole idea that we learn by following or we learn by watching is really risky, because first of all, people learn in very different ways. But second of all, it's like, who knows if they're going to learn what you want them to learn? Sure. Instead, what I recommended was that he do some very intentional approach to developing them in this particular area. And what we ended up having him do is he sat down with them 2 weeks in advance, of the trip. And he said, these are the topics that I am going to want to lobby the legislators about. He gave to each of them and said, I want you to go away and put together your lobby package, if you will. And then we'll get together about 3 days before the trip and you'll pitch to me, you'll lobby me. I'm going to give you feedback and I'm going to coach you and I'm going to help you understand what you did really well and where I want you to adjust. And then we're going to get in the car and we're going to drive to the Capitol and we are going to sit down with the legislators and you're going to each do one of the topics. And then we're going to debrief in the end. Well, forcing them to do the pre-work with intentionality, with a specific topic, get the coaching, go and actually do it, and then get feedback is so much more powerful than just jump in a car and let's go see what we can learn together.
I love that approach as well. And, I have to ask you, I mean, I'm going to put you on the spot here because you wrote this book back or released it in 2017, long before anybody had ever heard the word coronavirus. But now, we're having this conversation in 2022 and listen, work from home and remote working has become such a huge impact on the workplace. How does that impact developing your leaders? Like have you had any thoughts on that? Like what owners and CEOs should be doing in this sort of new hybrid remote working type world?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating question. And so I'm glad because I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. I mean, you've talked to a lot of people and have a ton of experience in this. I'll share with you what I'm seeing.
Okay.
First of all, I don't think that it changes as much as we thought it would change. In that 1 year or so where everyone was working from home, I say everyone, there were plenty of people that didn't have the luxury of working from home. But in that one year when that was more prevalent, I think that owners that were developing their people just had to adjust how they communicated and how they did the development. But the intentionality didn't change. Coaching, training was all still available. Getting broadening experiences and targeted learning opportunities was just available. We just did it differently. We did it via Zoom instead of in person. So I didn't see a whole lot of change through that. And now I think now that the pandemic has reached a new stage, because I'm not yet at the point where I say it's over, right. But now that it's reached a new stage, I think that the methodology can become much more live and in person, which I think is for most people a better way of learning, but I don't think it gets in the way of effectiveness. So that would be my thoughts. I'd be interested to hear yours.
I do have some thoughts on that. So first of all, I can tell you, and we were talking about the different places that, we speak or whatever, everybody, as soon as the associations I speak to could get back together face to face, everybody jumped on planes and got back together. There's like this love of people, humans seeing each other face to face, shaking hands and hugging each other and talking to each other, whether they're wearing masks or not. It is a core human thing. And I think that, in this world that we're in right now, working remotely is, it's a nice benefit to provide as long as it's balanced, like everything else in our lives. You don't try not to drink too much whiskey, but you can have some whiskey, you know what I mean? Or, don't eat too many, Big Macs, but you can have a Big Mac once in a while. It's all about balance and moderation. And I think that there is a middle ground that can be reached that makes, for a happy, productive workforce, but still gives them that development supervision they need. And then the other thought that I also have is, there are now studies that are coming out, surveys are coming out, Abby, that's just saying that. And surprisingly enough, it's the younger generations who desire to be in the office more than even the older generations, especially the ones just starting out. You're trying to develop your future leaders, and a 10-year span is a long time, It is just, there is something about working and being mentored and working with a team or a supervisor that you need to have that face-to-face to do. I know my kids are in their 20s and they both work at big companies, and they prefer to go in the office and be near their bosses for that reason. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think you're absolutely right. And I think what's interesting is that as the younger generation is anxious to get in the office more, they recognize just how much of the non-intentional conversations happen when you're in the hallway or, you come to the restroom or the cafeteria or on your way to or from lunch or something like that, that they can't get when they're at home because there's no hallways, with anybody else in it. And the how quickly you can get responses if you can just pop your head into someone else's office makes a big difference. But I also think it's interesting that, to your point about the balance, what I have also read is that while the younger people do want to be in the office, they don't want to be in the office every day, all
Right.
day.
Exactly.
Flexibility and are demanding it.
They are. And they've been demanding it for years, Abby. We just ignored them up until the pandemic. I mean, they're smarter than us. Let's admit that. And they knew, 5, 7, 8 years ago, they're like, hey, we can work remotely 2 days a week. The cloud is fine. It's reliable. There's plenty of applications. It's fine. And we were the ones that were saying, nah, you get your butt in the office now, because that's the way we've always done it. And the pandemic proved that they've been right all along. So I think it's just important. And I guess, if you are going to want to sell your company in 5 or 10 years, I do believe that and you want to find the right buyer. That right buyer is going to want to buy a company that's got a great workplace attitude, where there's happy employees working there. And part of that is giving them the flexibility of remote working while still combining it with that face-to-face mentorship that I think so many people need. Okay. In one of your chapters, you talk about implementing systems, and we kind of touched on this briefly earlier when we were talking about the E-Myth, but you do have thoughts about, you have to have a system for developing your strategies. You have to have a system for management, a system for marketing, a system for sales. Tell me a little bit more about that. I'll pick marketing and sales, for example. What do you mean by a marketing and sales system that you should have in your company?
Well, I think the best businesses have systems and processes and tracking and measures for everything that is important to the results of the business. And so for me, results that are super important are, profitability. And with that, of course, revenue and expense management and things like that. And so ensuring that you've got systems in place that are repeatable and reliable and can be standardized as you grow, and you can build training in those systems so that you've got qualified people delivering in those systems. And when the systems, either you outgrow the systems or the systems are no longer working for the, results that you're going after, well, then you change the systems. Right. But I think, the idea of everyone kind of doing things their own way is not what's going to attract a good deal from a buyer. You need those systems and that stability and that standardization and reliability in order for a buyer to know that they're getting something that they can then replicate.
Agreed. I mean, you can certainly assume that the buyer wants to inherit or take over a business that's got these processes in place. I found in my experience as well. So, buyers have their own issues like sellers. I mean, they're not sure about the investments that they're making. And when they inherit a company that has good systems in place, I've seen a few times, Abby, where buyers are like, wow, these guys have a really good sales process. We need to mimic that sales process back in our business as well. Do you know what I mean?
That's cool. Yes. I love that.
So there is a lot, and that is a value. I mean, that is where you have a prospective buyer in there and you're like, hey, yeah, we do have a great process. So that, I think I've just updated my price 10%. If you want to take advantage of this process. So I think that's, having those processes in place are really, really important. And I'm glad that you said it. It has to do, like I said, for everything. And like you write, it's not just sales and marketing, but it's also with your people and management, which is really good. All right. So we have, listen, I'm jumping around. I love this book so much. I mean, we could talk for ages, but I want to make sure we just get this into a certain period of time so people don't, get too tired of hearing you and I talk. But we talked earlier about, and we'll end on this about the, what's next, because you go into detail about this near the end of your book. And I do want to have your final thoughts on what is next. You sell your business, you should be thinking ahead. You say that you need to uncover sort of 3 big components. What are your strengths? What are your passions? What are your lifestyle priorities? What does all that mean?
Yeah. So that whole process to me is just so exciting to go through with an owner. And what I really recommend, I mean, it works for other executives as well, but in the context of the book, it's targeted towards an owner. But what is important is that they start this process around 6 months or so before they actually leave, because they're going through a transition where, on the one hand, they are moving towards something that right now is really unclear,
Mm.
directional interest, but they're also letting go of something that they have held dear for a long time, which is their business. And so the three components that you were talking about are kind of the model that I've built around that. And the first component is, what are your favorite strengths? And that's important is, first of all, the favorite piece is really important. When someone is moving into their next chapter, they have earned the right not to have to do things that are strengths of theirs, but they hate doing. They want to, they want to be investing in strengths that they really enjoy. So
Yeah.
I always target the favorite strengths. And I've got some tools that I help them with, to really surface up what are those favorite strengths, because our culture also doesn't make it easy for people to talk about what their strengths are. So sometimes, it gets a little bit tricky for owners to figure that out. And the second one that you talked about is uncovering your passions. And at this point in your career, at this point in your life, it's really about doing things that bring you joy, doing things that motivate you and that you're passionate about. And I know that most people that I work with really sort of they struggle a little bit with this, because they think about it in terms of, well, but Abby, I'm passionate about basketball, but I'm not going to play basketball. I'm not going to coach basketball. So why is that relevant? And basketball itself is not necessarily the most relevant part of that process. But the reason that someone loves basketball is maybe because they love the strategy of the game.
Mm.
Maybe it's because they love the the team environment, and working with a group of people towards a common objective, winning the game. Maybe it's because they love the idea of, I don't know, I'm just making some things up now. And so what we're doing when we look at passions is we're really getting underneath what are the motivators. And when we can pull on those motivators, now we can say, all right, well, maybe you're not going to apply it to basketball, but what would you want to apply it to? And we start to generate some interest and intrigue in different areas that might be a part of their next chapter. And then the third component you talked about was lifestyle priorities. And so, those can be a wide range of things. I have some, for example, some clients that have said, you know what, Abby, the only lifestyle priority that's really important to me right now is I've spent the last 40 years waking up at 5:30 in the morning, early bird, but I would just love to be able to sleep until 6:30 because I haven't had the opportunity to do that. Other people, lifestyle priorities might be, I want to be able to take 2 months and travel to China without having to be committed to something else. So it really varies. For many of them, it's ancillary things that they want to bring into their life, but the combination of those three things starts to form a picture that then we can use to go out and explore what are the opportunities out there. Because one of the things that I find in working with owners is that they are super smart and experienced at the areas that they've spent their career working in.
Right.
But we often underestimate what opportunities are out there beyond what we already know. And when they start talking to people with their strengths, favorite strengths, and their passions, motivators in mind, a whole new world starts to open up for them. And that can be super exciting. And that's where I like to help them get to. And that way, leaving behind doesn't feel as difficult because they're going to something that's super exciting for them.
See, and that encapsulates what I like so much about this book. There are books on exiting your business and succession planning that just talk about valuation, or they talk about the nuts and bolts of the transaction itself, or how to find a buyer for your business, or how to prep your business for a sale. And they're all good. Those are all useful books. This is a book about planning your succession, right? It's supposed to be read before we start digging into those details. And a big part of planning it is not only, making sure that we've got a strategy for succession, and making sure that we're heading in the right direction of having the different pieces in place. We talked about processes, but also what's happening after, and that's part of the plan, where you're going to be. And that all has to be thought about in advance, particularly if you're going to be looking ahead 5 to 10 years. Abby, is there anything else that you want to say about the book before I let you go? Anything that I did not ask, or specific points? I know you want people to buy it, so let's not get too detailed, but I just want to give you the opportunity if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Well, what I really like to add is a big thank you to you. You are a phenomenal interviewer, and you're
Thanks.
to glean insights from what you read, whether it's my book or anybody else's book, is exceptional. So thank you for pulling out so many really relevant themes. The only other thing I would add is that a piece for owners to think about as they think about that next chapter is relevance. And I think relevance is, it's the most common word that I hear owners talk about, is how am I going to stay relevant in my next chapter?
Yeah, that is really a big issue. I appreciate that very much. It's great thoughts. The book, again, is called Straight Talk About Planning Your Succession. It's a primer for CEOs. I have been speaking with Abby Donnelly. You can get this book on Amazon and, of course, other places online. It's a very insightful, but yet an easy read. I had no problem making my way through it. So it's not some kind of academic tome that you have to, you wade through. It's very well written. So, Abby, I want to thank you for joining me. Great book. And I look forward to your next book. You're working on it now?
Yep, I am. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And hold on for just a minute, and I'll say goodbye to you personally once I stop this recording. But guys, thank you so much for watching and listening as well. You have been watching and listening to another episode of Biz Books. My name is Gene Marks. I'll be back shortly in another 2 weeks with another interview with another great author like Abby as well. So stay tuned. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again soon. Take care.